This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and things in mirrorless camera land, they just keep getting more and more exciting. Fujifilm has made some really lovely mirrorless cameras, and they tend to be very expensive also. I mean, creeping up there with the price of, say, a Sony A7, not the A7 II. So they've been kind of, maybe a hard sell, even for people like me. APS-C size sensor, you think, what can I get for the money? So their answer is the new Fujifilm X-T10 just came out. This has pretty much all the goodness of the X-T1, minus a few things we'll tell you about, but in terms of imaging capabilities, processor, all that sort of thing, sensor in here, all that goodness. It's a really impressive camera, and this comes in at $799 for the body, so that makes it a lot more affordable than the $1299 X-T1. We're going to look at it now. So here it is, the Fujifilm X-T10, as you can see, strongly branded right here. By the way, this is available in either black or silver, so you know the top bits would be silver on the silver model and bottom bits, but either way, it's going to look good, same price. Both should be available right now. I like the silver look, it's really retro, but I went with the black one because when you have one of those black and silver high quality looking cameras, everybody looks at you and says, ooh, look at the person with the fancy camera. And I like to go unnoticed if I'm doing street photography, but that's up to you. It's nice to have both options available. This is a very compact APS-C sensor size camera, so just like a lot of the rebels out there, for those of you who aren't real knowledgeable about all sorts of cameras, your more affordable digital SLRs, they're all APS-C size sensors. Obviously, it's not a full-frame sensor. It's about the same size and weight as the very diminutive Sony a6000, which is one of the smaller and lighter APS-C cameras. It's a little bit smaller than the X-T1. Now, the X-T1 came out over a year ago now, and this is the slightly more affordable version, or more than slightly, really, because the X-T1's about $1299 or so. This is $799. So where Fujifilm cameras were very high quality and their images have a reputation, especially their JPEG quality, and believe me, it's true, the JPEGs are amazing on this camera, they were also pricey. So Fuji said, hey, why don't we make a more affordable version of our SLR sort of body style with the faux pentaprism right here camera? And they didn't subtract much. You get the same X-Trans CMOS 2 sensor on here, the same Generation 2 processor, which is really is a customized Sony sensor with their own color array on top, no anti-aliasing filter for really sharp images. 16 megapixel, which is, even if you're cropping, I find plenty of megapixels to work with, unless you want to crop and print a 20 by 36 or something like that. Crazy. It's really quite sharp and good. So everything you get in the X-T1 in terms of imaging quality, you're going to get here. A few things change. This one is not a weather-sealed body. Now, I go out when it's drizzling, raining lightly all the time and take pictures. If it's pouring, it would not be a good idea. Don't do that. If you want to jump on a canoe and shoot some action photos of white water, no. Then you want the X-T1 or some other weather-sealed camera. But if it's drizzling out, like I said, it's certainly not going to hurt it at all. The viewfinder, the electronic viewfinder, has slightly lower magnification, not a big enough deal to really talk about. Slightly lower back 3-inch LCD resolution as well. Again, not much of a difference, 920K versus 1024K. It's an articulating LCD, by the way. It is not a touchscreen. I wish it was. So you've got a variety of movement here, which helps you frame your shot. This is a mirrorless camera. That means there's no pentaprism up here. There's no mirror going on. So like Sony ILC's Olympus OMDE family, you get the idea, and all of Fuji's other mirrorless cameras, that's what allows it to be more compact, a lot smaller than, say, a Nikon or a Canon traditional digital SLR. It's available with a couple of different kit lenses if you like. You could just get the body only. The cheaper one for $100 more adds on a really low-level zoom lens that I wouldn't recommend for a camera of this level. If you're spending this much on the camera already and you're looking for that imaging quality, don't get a cheesy lens. The other kit lens is the really venerable 18 to 55 millimeter that we have on here. That's f2.8 to 4. So it's not a constant aperture, but that's still a very fast lens, and the image quality is amazing. The build quality is very good. Metal on here feels great. Yes, it is a tromboning kind of lens right there. Doesn't have creep if you hold it upside down though, which is nice. Anyway, really good lens. This is good enough that if you don't have the money to go with some prime lenses right away, you're going to be pretty impressed with the shots. And going down to f2.8 at the wide end and even 4 at the long end really gives you plenty of bokeh. In fact, we have one sample shot when we go through our photo gallery where you'll see that I actually did use this lens and got some really phenomenal bokeh out of it. Camera can also shoot 1080p video up to 60 frames a second. It's not bad. For those of you who are looking to do professional or semi-professional videography, this wouldn't be my first choice. I would really, if you're looking for something mirrorless in this size range, I say the Sony a6000 really kicks its pants for that. For you everyday normal people who want to shoot video, you'll enjoy it just fine. One thing that's new on this is that firmware 4.0 that you've heard about for the X-T10, well, all that stuff is built in here. Faster autofocus, you have phase detection and contrast detection autofocus. You have continuous autofocus and focus tracking now. It works mostly. I mean, I still find that I can do it pretty well myself manually by playing with the shutter and having either zone or spot going on, but because it's not so bad actually, and they claim a degree of 3D tracking, so if something is coming at you, it can maintain focus. Another thing that is different from the X-T10 is there is no dedicated ISO dial. However, there's enough controls on here, and you got your front wheel and stuff, so it's easy enough to change ISO. And this has all the usual great ISO settings. So you can say, I want auto ISO, but I want to top that off at 1600, so you don't want to be surprised with a 6400 ISO shot and introduce more noise. Dial here for your shutter speed goes up to 4000. If you switch over to electronic shutter, you can go up to 32,000. We got our EV dial in 1/3 increments right here. We have our threaded shutter release. That's the movie mode button right there. Not too tricky on this one. You press it and it shoots. You press it again and it stops. No weird things. There's a little dial over here, and you can see we have auto or not auto. Now, this doesn't have a PASM dial. So what you're going to do is use the aperture ring on your lens. This is kind of a more weird lens. It has a automatic versus manual aperture, and then you turn the aperture ring, but it actually has no markings up. But you'll see on-screen LCD indications. Other Fujinon lenses actually do have the aperture markings there. Anyway, so if you want to put it in not auto mode, which is where we have it right now, and you want to shoot aperture, you use the aperture ring here. Alternatively, you can also use this front dial. How convenient is that? So if you don't want to reach and use the aperture ring, you can do that. Obviously, if you want to change to shutter priority, you just take it off of A and choose your shutter speeds right there. If you want a full manual, you set your aperture, you set your shutter speeds right here, and there's also another handy dandy front dial, so you can have one doing aperture, one doing the shutter speed change too if you want. Or you can control ISO. There's a whole lot of things going on here. We got the quick menu as well. Let's turn the camera on so we can see that. Quick menu gives you, well, quick access to all sorts of standard important features. You want to choose your focus zone, for example, your ISO, max ISO floor right there, white balance, standard. That means standard film effect. Because this is Fujifilm and they're smart enough to capitalize on the old film business, which isn't making a whole lot of companies much money anymore. Sorry, Kodak. Anyway, you can choose from a bunch of different film emulations, which is brilliant because Fuji made some of the most popular films around. I mean, and they still do for those who want to use it. There are some available. So the standard is a Provia, for those of you who know Fujifilm. Then you've got Velvia for vivid colors, and you've got Astia for portraits, and they've added classic chrome, so that's another new one there. And this is in addition to, you know, the usual camera filters that probably a lot of people don't use, like toy camera, sepia, and all that kind of thing. You got your flash control right here. You can also control it with these buttons. So your quick menu. You got your full menu buttons, and this is a little different from the X-T10. I find it a little bit more intuitive. Again, not a touch screen, so you're going to use the D-pad right here to move around. Hit the back button when you're done. You have another dedicated function button right there. You can change your view mode if you want. Otherwise, it uses a little sensor to detect when you put your eye up to the eyepiece and switch off the LCD and turn on the eyepiece. For me, that works pretty well. You got your AE lock, you got your autofocus lock going on right there. Your playback button. Very, very nice, very tactile, very good controls. It's a shooter's camera. Standard hot shoe up here. And oh yeah, one more thing. It has a flash. This little lever right here pops up the flash. And Fuji actually warns you, don't cut yourself. So there's been some debate over whether this is metal or plastic. I don't know if it's a very light aluminum or something like that. It's not really something you can cut yourself on. This is a useless thing. If there was such a thing as guide number -1, that would be this flash right here, because the camera says, hey, I have a flash, so I'm going to pretend that I can actually expose differently because of the flash. It has very little flash power, it has very little reach, and you're really better just getting a hot shoe flash like Fuji's EF42 flash, or if you can find that itsy little square flash for the camera, maybe too. I personally go with the EF42 if you're doing indoor shots where you need some serious light and reach. So, there it is. I would never use it again. It's a small camera. I have fairly big hands. I'm a tall woman. I have long fingers. I'd say I have your average man-sized hands. Just like the Sony a6000, this is kind of small to hold on to. We have the thumb grip here, or wart, to try to make it a little bit easier. We have a little bit of sculpting. They do make a $159 grip you can put on to make this easier to hold on to. Now, it's okay. I find I have to use two hands because you get a hand cramp trying to squeeze on something as small as this. But one thing I keep hitting is the D-pad buttons instead, and I'm accidentally going into flash control mode instead, which is kind of annoying. So that's up to you. You might want a grip, or you might want to consider a bigger camera if that is really a problem and you got big mitts. And continuing, I walk around. We have a nice little metal door right here. We have our micro HDMI and micro USB connections inside of there, and a 2.5 millimeter jack. That can either be for a remote or for a mini jack microphone. Oh wow, it's really hard to find a 2.5 millimeter, so I guess you go with a 3.5 and get a 3.5 to 2.5 millimeter adapter. Gee, thanks Fujifilm. It does have a built-in stereo mic, the camera, which is fine for your casual movie shooting, but you certainly don't want to use it if you're doing something a little bit more professional and you don't want to pick up all sorts of room noise. And on the bottom here we have our usual kind of poppy open door, and this is where the battery lives and the SD card. The SD card is jammed right there against the back of the door area. A little bit fiddly. Helps if you have fingernails to pop that out. It's a very strong spring. I have shot cards across the room several times. And the battery right here, which is good for 350 shots, says SIPA mirrorless cameras don't tend to have great battery life. So far, I've been shooting over 500 shots when just shooting photos, not throwing in video. Video does tend to eat up more power than is your standard. Square battery there, the NPW126, for those of you who track these things. Now, in terms of smallness, this is the original A7, not the A7 II. That is actually a bigger and heavier camera, so you get the difference in size. This is already pretty darn teeny. Obviously, this is going to be teenier, and we'll put them like so on their noses so you can see the top of the body view as well. There you can see the difference is reasonably significant. Another important thing to note is the difference in size of lenses. APS-C lenses don't have to be as big as full-frame lenses because the sensor is smaller. The diameter of the lens doesn't have to be as big to cover the sensor. So you're also looking at different size lenses. Now this is just the kit Sony lens, the 28-70. And it's already noticeably wider, so there's another thing to factor in for your equation of portability versus image quality or sensor that you prefer. APS-C versus full frame right here. Teeniest full frame you can get, the original A7. Next we're going to splice in some photos of the X-T10 with the Sony a6000. I would say in the consumer market, the place where folks walk into Best Buy and try to pick what camera they want. They know they want a better camera and all that sort of thing. Those are two that people might be comparing, and the a6000 is about the same size as this, and it's a really teeny camera as well, so you can see, and that's APS-C, so the lenses are similar in size, though Fuji tends to go wider more often with their Fuji XF lenses, and the wider aperture the lens is available, while the lens has to get a little bit bigger to accommodate that, so you'll see a little bit added thickness. While we're talking about the a6000, fantastic camera with a 24 megapixel sensor. We have done a video review of that. Like I said, I would choose that one for video. When it comes to image quality, I really give Fujifilm the edge with the X-T10, particularly if you're a JPEG shooter, because the JPEG processing is famously just amazing. I mean, you can spend a lot of time in Lightroom twiddling with the image and say, well, look, the JPEG that Fujifilm gave me is really just about all that. Fuji bundles the customized version of Silky Pics for processing RAW files for those of you who do like to work with RAW. And even though it has a real clunky, weird user interface, I do tend to use it because it actually brings out more detail. Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom, even the CC versions, still, even though they have RAW plugins for this camera, do tend to sometimes watercolor things a little bit. So I start preliminary using Silky Pics to process, and after that, you can bring it into Photoshop to your heart's content to play with it. There's plenty of dynamic range here. There's amazing color, so you've got a lot to work with. Now, equally important to your camera body is your lenses, and I'm going to spend some time with this because Fujinon lenses, the XF series lenses, they're just really optically stunning lenses and a good value too. Now, this is coming from shooting with the Canon 6D, which is a full-frame camera lens. Canon has a lot of, and other manufacturers too, very good lenses at pretty good price points. And then I switched over to the Sony a6000 and a7 ecosystem, and I was kind of shocked at the lens prices there for the full-frame lenses. Now, Sony's prime full-frame lenses are generally pretty good, but some of them, like their $1,000 24 to 70 f4 Sony Zeiss lens, that one is just not so great, and it costs an awful lot of money. Just about every lens I look at with this, for the Sony a7 is about $1,000. If you look at the a6000, you can get a lot of cheaper lenses for the crop E-mount, and they're also kind of bleh. And there are exceptions. The 50mm f1.8 is very good. I'm not saying they're all bad. Actually, I like the 16 to 70 Sony Zeiss zoom. That's f4 continuous one there that gives you the same range as your 24 to 105 Canon L lens and pretty good image quality. But anyway, the lens selection overall for the a6000 is not so great. When you're looking at street prices of around $500 per lens for the Fuji camera, you get some really stunning lenses. So to see what some of them are, the 55 to 200, they have a more expensive lens also in the zoom range, but this is the advantage also of APS-C, moving on to another thing, because that's a crop factor. So whatever the focal length is, you multiply by 1.5 to equal your full frame. So that 200mm is really a 300mm reach. To find a 300mm lens on some other mirrorless bodies is pretty tough or very expensive. So when you're talking full frame. So for those of you who like to do, distance shooting, animals, birding, insects, that sort of thing. Anytime you need a long reach, this is a very effective way, and you're still going to get very sharp and very detailed shots. So this lens is not even too gosh darn humongous, as you can see, compared to the kit lens. And then Fuji has a bunch of very nice prime lenses. Now this is the 35mm f1.4. This is one of the earlier lenses, and yes, it does chatter if you're in automatic mode, because automatic mode uses continuous autofocus. If you have continuous autofocus turned on, this guy is just going to constantly microfocus until you just want to go crazy. So you don't use it on continuous autofocus if you can help it, if you don't like the chatter. Anyway, very compact, very light lens. This thing is one of the nicest 50mm equivalent lenses I have seen, especially for the price. Again, street price, say around $500 or so. This price is like $600, but you shouldn't be paying that much, hopefully, for it. There are a whole lot of others. There's the 56mm lens that they came out with not too long ago. That one is big, relatively speaking, bigger, fatter lens, but awesome, awesome lens. They have plenty of ultra wide angle lenses for you to choose from. So great lens ecosystem, all very high quality if you go with the XF lenses. Some of the older ones might be a little slower with autofocus, but with this newer body that has phase detection plus contrast detection, that improves a whole lot. The 18 to 55 is one of the newer lenses. This thing is really quick to focus, and even this is pretty good, actually. And this is one of the slower focusing lenses, 35mm. So how quick is autofocus? Well, we're a little close to our lens right now, but you heard the beep. It's quite quick, and this is with the zoom lens again. So let's switch over to our little chattery 35mm lens that just about everybody's going to want to buy if they're an enthusiast, and see how that does. Alrighty, so here we go. We are not in AF continuous mode right here, so it's going to actually focus when I half press the shutter button, and you can listen to the sound it makes. It's actually pretty quiet. All right, let's change our focus a little bit. That's not bad, really, for one of the slowest focusing lenses that's available. It's absolutely not bad. And I'm going to put it in continuous mode just so you can hear the chatter. Probably can hear a little of the tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick. And then it finds its focus. This lens has fantastic bokeh. It just takes really nice shots. And here's a picture that we just took at f4, so you can see the amount of bokeh there for things that are not even that far in the background. That's just really luscious and nice right there. And now we're going to segue into our sample photo gallery, so you can see a variety of shots taken: architectural shots, people shots, bokeh shots, nighttime shots. This does surprisingly well. Now, when you're using one of the image stabilized lenses like the 18 to 55 or the 55-200, but for example this is the one that I use for the night shots, so you're going to take a look at. The image stabilization in these optically stabilized lenses is remarkably good, and it wanted to do some terrifying things like I was hand holding and I wanted to use crazy things like a quarter of a second exposure, and I was like, okay, sure, let's see. And the shots actually came out. So if let the camera give it a try and see. You might actually surprise you given how good the stabilization is. Of course, you can actually manually control all of your settings if you find that too horrifying or if you don't have super rock steady hands. I do tend to have rock steady hands. So as a night camera, and that's when it helps also that this sensor is 16 megapixels, not 24. You get larger sensor sites here. You get some very good nighttime photography, but we've got all sorts of shots so you can see, and we tell you what the exposure setting was, the focal range, which lens was used, so you can get an idea of the kind of pictures that this camera can take. This has a metal lens mount. You know, nothing about the build quality here is at all discouraging, by the way. And you can see the sensor right there. Lenses fit nice and snug so far for the ones I've used. And if this is where you can control your manual continuous or single focus right there. And you can also set my favorite, which is AF plus manual focus. So you can let it autofocus, and if you want to micro adjust using the focus ring, you can. Although I have to say this thing is spot on with focus. I mean, once in a while if you're taking something that has close elements and far elements, it might pick the wrong thing. That happens with any camera. But in general, it is so spot on and sharp. I wish my Sony A7 could behave as well with focusing. This does have peak indicator if you want. That is something that I use. You can set the in-focus areas to be highlighted in your choice of colors. For example, I use red. But you know, most of the time it's even not so necessary. And I've even shot some pretty close-up pictures of flowers with bugs on them, and it's really good. It's just really good. So this is a camera that if you're an enthusiast, you can go with, because you got full manual control, a fantastic selection of lenses, and you put it in that auto mode, and it's pretty much idiot-proof, going to take nice in-focus shots. Now it's time to throw some specs at you. Cameras have lots of specs, and we're not going to go over every single one. You can go to Fujifilm's website and read detailed specs to your heart's content. But one thing to know, the new autofocus system is 49-point single focus, 77-point zone and wide tracking mode. I really like the zone. That's my favorite personally. Use contrast AF that covers nearly the entire frame, and you can do phase detection that covers the central area, and you've got the usual move your focus zones around over here. In fact, let's give that a try right now just so you can see what that looks like. So I simply press down on the wheel, and then I can move, and you can see all the focus points available right there in zone and so on. Touchscreen would be nice, I have to admit. And you can set your zone size if you want to. When you pick what you want, you just hit the center button again there. Like I said, autofocus speeds are pretty good. Continuous tracking, it's pretty decent. That's one place where mirrorless cameras still aren't all there compared to traditional digital SLRs, but it's usable enough. If I was a sports photographer, I would still go with a standard DSLR, to be honest, but as mirrorless cameras go, the X-T10 is way better than the X-T1 when it first came out, and it's pretty darn good. Is it going to beat the A6000? That one's a real autofocus demon. Fujifilm claims yes. I'm not so sure I would go with that. Camera weighs 13.4 ounces with the SD card and the battery in there, so it is pretty darn light. Max ISO is 51,200. You're not going to use it though, trust me, because you know nothing looks good at 51,200. Up to 6,400 usable though. 3,200 actually not so bad. It does have Wi-Fi. You can use a smartphone app to remote control the camera or transfer up to 30 pictures at a time. Why 30? I don't know. Only Fuji knows the answer to that. And it can geotag your images as in-camera raw processing. So that's the Fujifilm X-T10. Easy to recommend if you're looking for a camera in this price range and you want to go lighter certainly than a digital SLR, though. You know, mirrorless has its own set of benefits, like that electronic viewfinder with its auto brightness settings. So even in the dark you can see through it. It's an OLED viewfinder. It's really sharp. You get information like focus peaking, zebra kind of stuff. Customizable, whatever you want to see in there. Once you get used to having electronic viewfinder, it's hard to go back. So that speaks in favor of this over a digital SLR. Also, obviously, a lot smaller, lighter, much easier to carry. Like I said, if you're a sports photographer, though, you still might want to go with the digital SLR. Versus the Sony a6000, much better lens selection for the money, in my opinion, versus the A7. It depends on whether you want full frame, does it or not. And this is considerably cheaper, and that's what Fujifilm has done right here. This at $799 is a lot less frightening prospect than the X-T1 was when it came out, costing as much as some very, very serious competition there. So yeah, right now for $799, something this small, the image is just stunning. The focus, the contrast, the colors, we get very, very nice dynamic range on this as well. It's a wonderful little camera. So that's the Fuji X-T10. It's available now if you're looking for a light but high quality APS-C sensor size mirrorless camera, or even if you don't know if you want mirrorless or not mirrorless, but you like the idea of it being compact, with a family of really excellent lenses that are available at very reasonable prices given the lens that you got. Let me tell you, this thing takes amazing pictures. Yes, it's not full frame for you full frame people where nothing will do, but let me tell you, between this and my Sony a7, there are times when I'll still pick this up, especially if you want that kind of long zoom reach that a crop sensor is going to give you. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written review and subscribe to our YouTube channel.